You guys aren't thinking about... I pushed the last piece of pancake through syrup smudges. Ending it soon? I watched her face, her arms, her shoulders for a reaction. Are you? What? Of course not. Jeez. We have years ahead of us. She looked toward Dad, then turned her eyes back on the catalog, where maybe her words at least reassured those on the pages. Okay, it's between the Delightful Dynasty and the Resurrection Again, or the Forever at Peace. She flipped between dog-eared pages, showing us three with very similar green slabs. Too many doilies and rose petals on the last one, and the Resurrection Again sounds too optimistic. Dad outlined the cross at the center of the headstone with his pinky. So the Delightful Dynasty, then? Mom flipped back to the picture of John and Susan Smith. Abby, there's nothing delightful about dying, Dad said as he opened the paper again to the business section. Whoever came up with that title is trying to sell the product, and I won't subscribe to that kind of commercialism. Damn it, Joe! Mom's catalog smacked against the table as she pulled the newspaper out of Dad's hands. I wish you would care about this a little more. I do care about it, I just don't like watching you wring your hands, worrying about something that's not an issue at... He checked the clock on the stove. 7:55 on a Saturday morning. Because it is an issue. Her eyes slipped, but pulled away before they reached me. We are going to die someday, and we need a plan so Josh won't have to make our decisions for us. Decisions. Wait, you're sure? Neither would look at me. You're sure you aren't planning on getting yourselves... Josh, I already said no. Mom picked the catalog back up and flipped through the pages, searching the crowd for the Smiths. The newspaper fluttered from her lap to the floor, and Dad picked it up, flicking it upright in front of his face. What about an urn? I picked a catalog off the floor. But when I looked up from the last page where urn prices are usually listed, my parents' expression stopped me. Criminals are cremated and forgotten. People like us are buried, Dad said as he turned to the obituaries. And what about the mausoleum down 45th? There was a commercial yesterday. Mom's hand closed over mine. Honey, this is our home. We moved in here after we were married and we raised you here. Your grandparents and Uncle Pete are buried out front. We want to be buried here too. My hands were folded on the table when she released them, and I saw them folded on my stomach as I lay in the casket, suffocating next to Uncle Pete. And geez, we're not poor. The catalog was open again to John and Susan Smith, where the syrup had turned matte over the granite of the Delightful Dynasty. I heard the call through the living room answering machine as I was shaving, and the razor nipped off a bite of skin. I dressed slowly with a scrap of toilet paper reddening on my cut, pulling each pant leg, each sleeve. My finger fell down the row of shirt buttons, shivering on the edges serrated like quarters or butter knives. The zipper jamming, each linked together, and the silence of the apartment sounded like a gun cock. In the living room, I pulled a pair of binoculars from the side table drawer and looked out to the life in the city below, steadying the shaking lenses against the window. Trees bordered the streets, patched to the sidewalk by small grass blankets. People wove between people, late for work and first dates and violin lessons. A dog's leash tripped his owner when he darted past to snip at a tree. A bus driver swore through his windshield, honking at a man whose cell phone obscured his view of the do not walk light. On a playground a few blocks west, a woman laughed, picking wood chips off a sobbing child's bare arms. Farther down 17th, in the suburbs where the buildings became smaller and the sidewalks were empty, the ground gradually rotted to a freshly dug brown and gray headstone gray. Leaving the binoculars to watch the city from the windowsill, I left for the elevator. I stepped out into the lobby, the sun focused through the tall front windows, coming to a hot pinpoint in my eyes. I undid my top button, running the back of my nail against my shaving cut, and pulled off the toilet paper still stuck to the dried blood. It was cool in my car in the parking garage, and my sweat evaporated quickly, chilling the pores on my back and neck long after I turned on the heat. The roadside graves seemed closer to my car today, like they were sliding off the curbs into traffic. Hundreds of names and dates and kind words reached for the treads of my tires, and I swerved, pulling my car into the shoulder near the median, as far from the headstones as I could get. I rested my forehead against the damp and chilly window until I could trust myself to drive again. When I arrived at the funeral home, the curved-spined owner shook my hand with both of his. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Lawson. The arrangements will have to be revised, unfortunately. The Delightful Dynasty was discontinued a couple of years ago, It's been out of style for a while, so I'm afraid there's nothing similar. The down that feathered the man's bald spot floated as he ran his pen down the spine of a catalog. He showed me the Dynasty 3, a granite block with an oversized rose in one corner. Dad hated roses. The owner suggested a few others, and I told him I'd think about it. He led me into a room where the oxygen had been replaced by the scent of carnations, lilies, and gladiolas. It wafted from the curtains and pulsed from the walls. The floor reflected petals and pollen into my nose, my eyes, my ears. The ceiling tiles dropped pieces of it into my hair. But it was a ghost scent that thousands of well-meaners and sorry-for-your-lossers had built into the walls. There were no flowers on the caskets on the days I was the first here. I'll step out so you can have a minute. He swam out of the flower stench while I pulled myself further into the room, toward my parents. Last week, the First Methodist Church won the battle for our house, reserving the land for its own parishioners. The defeat aged my parents, and they told me they were ready to let death catch up. I walked under the pink lights, aimed into their fiberglass cocoons, hers mauve and his gray, handlebars running the lengths of each, ready to be lowered into the ground in front of their headstones in someone else's yard and someone else's plot. I looked into the caskets one at a time, at Mom's crepe paper eyes and hands, part of complete body, and at the coffee stain age spots on Dad's face. Mom's face ignored me. Her eyelids kept me shielded from her sight. Her hands lay folded, refusing to reach for my hand resting on the casket's brim. The white whiskers on Dad's face were thick and sticky and peach, with pancake makeup. I reached into the coffin and felt some force surrounding his body, a slippery bubble of loss keeping our skin from meeting. I pushed through it, touching his right hand folded over his left. They say death is cold, but his hands were no colder than many I'd shaken at work. They were just emptier. Until today, Mom never wore lipstick or parted her hair in the middle. She never used cotton candy blush. Dad never would have worn the same shade. She would never iron her dress in pleats. He would never lie down in a suit. These were hollow puppets in front of me, or mortician's mannequins. Turning away, I took a deep breath from a river of air flowing in through a window and walked out of the empty room to the owner's desk to discuss the bodies. I picked up the urns 3 days later, on a day when the sky was holding the rain just out of earshot, like secrets that could either be dangerous or beautiful. The ceramic vases were almost identical, except for a tiny extra vine engraved on one, like a straw in a Diet Coke to differentiate it from the regular. "This one is your father," said the owner of the funeral home, pushing the diet urn across the desk to my hands. I got in the car. My parents rode shotgun, buckled in the same seatbelt. I passed the population sign for their town. When would they change the number from 15,496 to 15,494? Did one person have to change each sign hand by hand anytime someone died or was born? Who would change the number when he died? I parked at the curb across from their house, and we watched the orange X vibrate against the blue siding, day glow even on this cloudy day. Dad tipped forward toward the house, but the house wasn't ours anymore. Every house on the street had been X'd, and our home now belonged to corpses. I unbuckled our seatbelts and pulled my parents from the car. Kneeling beside the front door, I set the urns on the ground and opened them. I poured some of each into my hand and stood. As I walked around the house, I loosened my fist and let the dust escape between my fingers, floating through scattered picnic table pieces and sticking to moss-covered headstones. It settled me and my nearby grandparents, snuck into the cracked and tilted windowsill, and snowdrifted against the scuffed side of the house and along the broken back stoop. When the rain finally fell, chunks of it buried my parents into the dirt.